The UK delegation of the United Nations has posted a glossy propaganda video promoting the work of the Under Fire Agency, which was forced to sack staff linked to the 7th of October terrorist attack by Hamas. Let's have a look at the video that has been released on this.
For 75 years, UNRWA has been a lifeline for Palestinian refugees.
Since the start of the conflict in October of last year, we've provided food assistance to 1.9 million Palestinians, or 90% of the total population.
So that's talking about UNRWA, that is the UN agency that works within Gaza. It's a highly produced video posted on Twitter, reposted by the Foreign Office. The delegation has stated UNRWA saves lives. Well, why then, in August, did the UN sack 9 aid workers from UNRWA because of their likely involvement in the 7th of October attacks? I think that's the tip of the iceberg. We remember as well, there's more detail with this. You remember the Al-Shifa hospital where Hamas's technological infrastructure was underneath the hospital? Well, that was an UNRWA hospital. How did they not know that below the hospital there was all that technological infrastructure? Did they not see the terrorists coming and going? The delegation's post on Twitter is going to infuriate Israeli officials. It's infuriating me as well. More than 450 aid workers are members of the terrorist organisation. That's according to the Israeli officials and the Israeli Defence Forces. Benjamin Netanyahu has said UNRWA workers involved in terrorist activities against Israel must be held accountable. There are growing concerns about this as well. We remember that the UK defunded UNRWA. The money that we were giving them was taken away because of the links to terrorism. Well, now it's back. At the end of the delegation video, Barbara Woodward, who is our representative to the United Nations, her time, the money we pay her, was used to see what she has been claiming here. Let's see what Barbara Woodward actually said about UNRWA here.
The serious allegations against UNRWA staff earlier this year were fully investigated and acted upon. They offer no justification for cutting ties with the agency.
Well, Barbara, I'm afraid you're wrong. This is totally disgraceful. This is absolutely disgraceful. I cannot understand why we are promoting UNRWA. It is an absolutely horrific thing. Let's talk to Jonathan Sacerdoti. He's a journalist and broadcaster. Jonathan, what do you make of this?
It's outrageous, and the fact that this government, our new government, our Labour government, has decided to bolster UNRWA again after Britain quite rightly withdrew funding just shows how they're getting everything wrong in terms of the Palestinians. UNRWA, in fact, perpetuates the Palestinian refugee problem rather than solving it, because it inflates the numbers of Palestinian refugees by granting hereditary refugee status in perpetuity. And that's an approach that's unprecedented and unjustified in global refugee policy. Instead of promoting resettlement or integration, it actually traps generations in a cycle of dependency, fueling conflict and obstructing peace. And that's before we even think about October the 7th, when UNRWA members, UNRWA workers, were shown and proven to have been part of those brutal terrorist attacks when Palestinian terrorists burst out of the Gaza Strip into Israel, raping, kidnapping, killing, burning people to death. The fact that UNRWA also has hosted terrorist activities within its buildings, under its buildings, shows that it's been massively compromised by terrorism in the Palestinian territories.
There is, Jonathan, within this as well, there is a merging. Well, this is what I see, and you're the expert. Jonathan's a journalist and broadcaster. He understands these things far better than I do. But Jonathan, what I see is a merging. It's hard to know where one ends and the other begins. When it comes to Hamas, when it comes to UNRWA, there will be aid agencies and aid people who will tell you around the world, you've got to work with whoever's in the country, whoever's running the country. Hamas, of course, were running the Gaza Strip. But the point is, with all of what you're saying is true, but also there's other elements to this as well. They use children as human shields. They go into schools. They teach children to hate Jewish people. We've seen loads of evidence of that as well. This is UN money. This is taxpayers' money here in the UK promoting this as well. It's really worrying. I just think it's totally disgraceful and absolutely disgusting.
Well, the whole thing's contradictory because, you know, for example, in Lebanon and Syria, UNRWA colludes in denying basic rights to Palestinian descendants, and that prolongs their statelessness and their suffering. So even if we take out the current war as an example of the rottenness and the corruption of UNRWA by terrorism, we can see that all along it's not been helping the Palestinian people. It's been working against them, but also against Israel. And the fact that it's funded by Western nations like our own means that that's a dysfunctional system that's really just keeping alive this myth of the right of return that would basically obliterate the Jewish state of Israel. The right of return, for those who don't know, is this belief that many cling on to in Palestinian circles, that even if there are two states, a Palestinian state and a Jewish state of Israel, the Palestinians, these refugees who multiply every year in number because of UNRWA's unique definition of Palestinian refugees, they would have the right to return to Israel, which means that they would basically outnumber Jews in Israel, and they would then have a Palestinian state. So effectively two states, but neither of them would be Jewish, neither of them would be Israel. And that's why UNRWA, in perpetuating that, sabotages any possible path to peace. And I think Western nations like our own ought to have ditched it years ago. But after October the 7th, we've seen UNRWA workers, one hostage, a child who was released eventually from Gaza, said that there was an UNRWA teacher keeping him imprisoned in his house. We've heard other reports. We've seen UNRWA workers dragging the corpse of an Israeli who was killed on October the 7th. We know that UNRWA workers were involved in those attacks. We know that there is crossover between UNRWA and Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organisations.
We also
it's
know,
just unthinkable we should carry on funding them.
We also know, Jonathan, that Sharon Haskell and others within parliamentarian within the Israeli Knesset have put a motion forward. It's been carried that Israel should stop UNRWA actually working within Gaza and the West Bank. There is the usual and very predictable international outcry saying that Gazan children are going to starve. But the fact is it not, that actually there are many aid agencies that are working and are not riddled with Hamas terrorists. There are many aid agencies working in Gaza and the West Bank that the funding can be moved to them, and they can feed people who do need to be fed, innocent civilians who are in Gaza and the West Bank who do need to be kept alive and are dealing with a warlike situation, without funding UNRWA.
Well, of course, and I think the point is, if you look even at that, at the outlawing of UNRWA within Israel, it's notable that it was carried in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, by a massive majority across the board. So it's not a left-right issue, it's not a Netanyahu issue. People like to make him the big bogeyman of all this and of Israeli politics. No. Almost all Israeli politicians recognise that UNRWA is rotten and supporting terrorism, undermining any prospects for peace. It's an organisation that really is destroying Palestinian dignity, destroying Israel's chances of survival and destroying any chances of peace. And there are other UN agencies and bodies which could look after the needs of Palestinians. There just are. They should be encouraged and bolstered to do so, but they also need to be really careful not to use terrorist Palestinians on the ground. It's a very difficult part of this sort of activity anywhere in the world, especially in that region where terrorism and extremism is so rife. But UNRWA certainly isn't the answer. It's actually the problem.